Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're jumping right into the hidden, almost mechanical workings of the spirit world to solve a seriously fascinating cultural mystery. We usually think of ghosts as, purely mystical, but what if supernatural manifestations actually followed a strict, step-by-step rulebook? Let's explore a specific framework that claims to outline the exact physics of spirits, and we'll use it to answer a question you've probably noticed but maybe never really thought about. Okay, have you ever wondered why Western ghosts are traditionally depicted with fully formed bodies and legs, walking around haunted houses, while Japanese ghosts, often called yurei, are famously seen floating eerily with no legs at all? Think about it. In Western literature and film, ghosts walk down stairs. They leave footprints, they stand firmly on the ground. But in centuries of Japanese art and folklore, the spirit just tapers off into nothingness below the waist. So, is this just a random artistic choice, a cultural quirk, or is there an actual mechanical reason behind it? Well, to find out, we really need to look at the process of how a spirit supposedly builds a physical body. To answer this, we're turning to an incredibly unique source text. It's a spiritual revelation recorded fairly recently, on January 17th, 2018. This text details what it claims are the direct teachings of the ancient god Ophearis, essentially bringing ancient Egyptian and Greek spiritual concepts right into a modern context. Now, what makes this text so fascinating for our explainer today is that it doesn't just offer vague poetry about the afterlife. Instead, it actually attempts to provide a literal mechanical breakdown of how the spiritual interacts with the physical. It treats spiritual manifestation not as magic, but literally as an advanced form of physics. Specifically, we're going to focus heavily on Chapter 8 of this text. It's titled The Materialization Phenomenon of the God of Creation and Its Secret. This section breaks down the precise spiritual physics behind how something moves from a mere thought in the spiritual realm into a tangible, observable object in our physical reality. The text argues that the God of creation set up a very specific system for this, and by understanding this system, we can actually figure out why some entities materialize completely, legs and all, while others, fail to complete the process. According to this revelation, all physical creation in the universe begins with a single, incredibly powerful act of imagination and visualization. In fact, the text explicitly states that imagination is the beginning of magic. It proposes that reality doesn't begin with solid matter. No, it begins with the mind. So, if an entity in the spirit world wants to interact with the physical world, they can't just wish it into existence. They have to hold a highly concentrated, incredibly detailed visualization of exactly what they want to create. Thought is the initial spark, the raw fuel required to even get the engine of materialization turning. And this brings us to the absolute core of the text's argument. The revelation strictly defines this materialization process in 5 sequential steps. Now, pay close attention here, and please do not make a mistake with the step numbers, because this precise order is absolutely essential to how the phenomenon works. Step 1 is the imagination and visualization we just talked about. Step 2 is when that intense visualization transforms into active psychokinesis, the actual force of will. Step 3, this psychokinetic force acts almost like a magnet, gathering specific particles called reishi. Step 4 happens when exactly 4 or more of these reishi combine and stop moving. And finally, step 5, this combination suddenly transforms into elementary particles right in our physical world. If you miss a single step, the entire physical manifestation fails. Let's zoom in on step 3 for a second, because central to this is the concept of reishi. The text defines reishi as spiritual particles. You can kind of think of them as the subatomic building blocks of the spirit world. They're basically microscopic energy particles formed by coagulated thought. Now, on their own, they are entirely invisible to the physical eye and possess almost zero volume and zero mass. They're just everywhere, scattered like dust in the spiritual dimension, essentially just waiting for a strong enough psychokinetic will to gather them all together. So, the really crucial point in this sequence, step 4, relies on a very specific number, 4. The text claims that a fundamental, reality-altering shift occurs when exactly 4 or more of these invisible, weightless reishi particles are gathered together by the spirit's will, and this is the key part, stop their movement. It isn't just about gathering them up, it's about holding them perfectly still. When they're locked into place by intense concentration, a literal barrier between dimensions is crossed. At this specific threshold, when those 4 particles stop, they suddenly gain the mass of an elementary physical particle, like an atom. The text describes this resulting state so beautifully, calling it half matter, half ghost. And honestly, this explains so much about the classic tropes of hauntings. Because the entity is partially materialized into elementary particles, they can actually be seen by the human eye, and maybe even interact with light or temperature. But because they're still half ghost and not entirely dense physical matter, they keep the ability to do things like pass effortlessly through solid walls. They are caught perfectly right between the two realms.
Solving the mystery why Japanese ghosts float. Let's get right into it.
So now that we understand this meticulous framework, how does it explain our cultural anomaly? We know how a spear is supposed to build a body, so why do Western ghosts manage to build their legs, while Japanese ghosts end up floating, incomplete? Well, the text argues that Western religious traditions actively teach the mechanics of materialization, even if it's subtle. Because Western cultures have a deep history rooted in concepts like the resurrection of Jesus, who, according to the text, materialized fully before hundreds of people, spirits from these cultures have this subconscious blueprint for returning to the physical world. They basically understand the 5 steps, enabling them to fully materialize, legs included. In stark contrast, traditional Japanese religious teachings view the afterlife as a final destination. You go there and you stay there. There's really no major cultural framework or instruction manual for coming back.
And this fundamental difference in belief leads to a huge cascade of errors when a Japanese spirit tries to manifest. Because they're completely unaware of the strict 5-step process and they lack specific teachings from traditional Japanese gods on how to perform it, they attempt to manifest purely out of raw, undirected emotion. They just haven't been taught that visualization must be absolute. Because they firmly believe death was the definitive end, their attempt to cross back over is, well, clumsy. Ultimately, it results in incomplete mental concentration. They manage to visualize their face and torso, the parts of their identity they focus on the most, but they literally lose their concentration before they can gather enough rishi to materialize their legs. Their psychokinesis basically just runs out of gas halfway through the process.
All of this brings us to a really profound overarching takeaway from the text, and it's summarized perfectly in this quote. The current state is created by what you think of your body. See, in the physical world, we're so used to our bodies just being a fixed given. But in the framework presented by this 2018 revelation, a physical form, whether it's a fully walking apparition or a floating phantom, is entirely dependent on an entity's absolute mastery of their own thought. A ghost without legs isn't some different species of spirit. It's simply a spirit suffering from a lack of focus and a lack of proper education on how to hold those spiritual particles still. Which leaves us with a truly fascinating idea to ponder. If this text is correct, and the secret to materializing reality is simply the disciplined gathering of invisible particles through intense imagination and willpower, well, it's not just a lesson for ghosts. Knowing the strict 5 steps to how imagination hardens into physical matter, one really has to wonder, what reality is your mind building or failing to build at this exact moment?